Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Gloria from Gloria's Knits, and today will be podcast number 6. So we'll go through the typical format of knitting podcasts where we'll talk about what I'm wearing, finished objects, any works in progresses, and plans and acquisitions. So if that's something you think you will enjoy, make sure you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any of my new videos. And yeah, let's just jump right into today's video. Okay, so we'll start off with what I'm wearing. So I've shown this on my knitting podcast before, but this is my Eva cardigan by Petite Knit. I knit this pretty recently, I feel like within the past couple of months. I do have a knitting podcast on the whole process of when it was a work in progress, like when I cast it on to when I finished off and any like modifications that I did. So I'll link them down below to those videos if you want kind of a more in-depth like conversation about the Eva cardigan. But yeah, I knitted this using a Korean yarn that I purchased while I was on vacation. And it has some really cool kind of like rainbow color specks, not really specks, rainbow like coloring throughout the yarn. So for the most part, I feel like it's kind of like a brownish color, but on camera it kind of looks more gray. But in person, it definitely looks more brown with like rainbow-esque flair to it, if you know what I mean. But yeah, I really like this. I do think I will kind of reduce some parts of it in the near future after I kind of finish off some of my more urgent projects. I wouldn't call them urgent, but like projects that I want to work on more. I find that after I finish a project, it just kind of goes onto the back burner if I ever need to make changes to it, just because it's like already casted off my needles and like, for the most part, I could sort of wear it, but I'm not like 100% satisfied with it. So that's what is happening with this piece right now. I find the sleeves are a little bit short. Like when I move around, it like shows way too much of my wrist. And yeah, I don't know, like after I washed and blocked it, it was fine, and then like it like slowly shrunk as I wore it more. And I also want to redo the button band because it's a little too tight, so I feel like the front part of the cardigan kind of like goes up compared to the back. It's a little hard to see when I'm sitting down, but when I'm just like wearing it day to day, it's like really obvious, and I kind of don't love that about it. If I'm feeling very, very like ambitious, I might actually completely take out the button band and the bottom ribbing and just like extend the cardigan because I feel like it's a little bit too cropped for my liking. But that is a lot more work than what I want to sign up for. So I think I will most likely just undo the bind off of the button band and just try to loosen that and then extend the sleeves with either just like a longer cuff, or do I want to redo the whole cuff? No, I probably don't. I probably just will add like another inch to the ribbing on the end of my cuffs, and that's pretty much it. But otherwise, the Eva cardigan is a great pattern. It is like an oversized kind of like set in sleeve, contiguous sleeve type of shoulder construction with a 2x2 ribbing for all the finishings. So the cuff on the sleeves, the bottom of the body ribbing, and also the button band. I really do like this design. I found it was really kind of straightforward, and with this shoulder construction, it wasn't a lot of like ends to weave in, which is really nice, as opposed to kind of like a shoulder, like saddle shoulder construction that has a lot more ends to weave in. But this gives the shape of like a more fitted kind of like shoulder, so it's really nice. These are just kind of like my own gripes with my finished objects, so not so much as to the pattern, but like how I knitted mine up. But otherwise, I think I really like it still, and I would definitely knit more of these in different yarns and maybe just make it a little longer. But yeah, I really do enjoy this, and I would definitely make it again. So I highly recommend you check out this pattern if you are into kind of an oversized set in sleeve type of cardigan with 2x2 ribbing. So yeah, let's move on to finished objects. So I'm very excited. It's been quite a few podcasts since I've had a finished object. I feel like this might have been my last finished object, the Eva cardigan actually. So it was a couple podcasts ago, if not more. And it's because recently I've casted on a lot of projects and they've been on the needles. They have not been finished. And this was the only one that actually had sort of a tight deadline because it is my holiday sweater. and this is the Nova sweater. So this is how my finished project is looking. I do want to talk a little bit about the pattern first. So like I said, it is the Nova sweater and it's by the Knit Purl Girl. That is always a tongue twister. I feel like it's really hard for me to pronounce that, so hopefully I just have to say that once. But with this pattern, it is a circular yoke pattern that is done in a stranded colorwork with a really cool kind of, I would call it a festive but simple motif on the yoke. And then it also has a folded over 1x1 ribbed collar band. And same with the end cuffs and the bottom of the body ribbing. So these are all 1x1 rib, and it's just super simple in terms of what you expect for a stranded colorwork type of garment. The rest of the body is done in stockinette, and yeah, I think it looks really cute and, like I said, very festive. I typically would not go with yarn this bright, but in the sample photo of the project that the designer took the photos of, that one is done in kind of like a dark grayish color with a light kind of whitish color for the contrast color, versus the main color was the dark gray. So that one is definitely more, I would say, wearable piece. At least for me in my wardrobe, I like more neutrals. I like kind of just things that are really easy to like match and not stand out too much. But for this super, super, super red garment, it's a little hard to just wear on a day-to-day basis. I feel like today, when it's really gloomy outside, I don't really want to wear a super bright red sweater. So this definitely has a special occasion vibe to it. So I would wear it likely during Christmas or even maybe Valentine's, maybe Chinese New Year. I guess because Chinese New Year is usually pretty cold, so I guess I could pull off wearing this. But for the most part, I found that this one, due to my color choice, that's why it looks so festive. But if you were just to make it in a neutral color, I think it would be just very easy to wear. I think this one is quite a cute looking pattern. For my first colorwork garment, I think this ended up turning out pretty nice. I did knit the 4th size in the pattern, so this is size D. Because I was a little bit off gauge, I think that's why I chose D as opposed to C. And it does fit quite nicely. I would say if I had to make any modifications, I would have made the yoke depth like a little bit longer, like a little bit bigger before I put the stitches for the sleeves on hold and then started working on the body. Because I find like here, it sits close to my armpit, but not directly at it. So there is still like, I would say about like an inch or so of ease between my armpit and the garment. But I think I generally like the yoke depth to be a lot lower. Like you can see here, my armpit's all the way up here. There's this much ease. So it's quite a bit and it's just very comfortable. You don't feel like there's a lot of fabric kind of just sitting right up against your armpit. I find that makes me feel very like hot and sweaty, which is really gross. So I don't want that, especially with a wool garment. But otherwise, it is a more, I wouldn't say form-fitting, but it's not as loose as I normally have my garments. So I guess that is just a different look. It's totally fine. I also made this piece a lot longer than what I typically knit for my garments because I didn't really want it to be cropped. Because it is a festive sweater, I will be likely wearing it year after year during the holiday times. So maybe at some point I will grow out of my cropped garment phase. So I wanted to make this like full length. So it is really, really long. I feel like my high-waisted jeans go up to like here. So I could really like just tuck this in and it would, you know, give it the feel of like a cropped sweater. But I like to have that option with something that's supposed to be a bit more timeless. I think this is a very nicely constructed garment. I did end up weaving in all my ends and yeah, it looks quite finished. I had to, you know, like stitch up some holes that I had. For some reason, I had a hole like somewhere around like the top part of like the beginning of round, like around here. So I had to like stitch that up because otherwise it's just like a big gaping hole. Not sure what happened there. It wasn't even when I first joined the contrast yarn for the beginning of the color work. It was like somewhere down here. I don't know why. I think maybe I just like didn't pull the strand of yarn like tight enough, so my tensioning was probably off. But otherwise, I think that was quite an easy fix. It looks a little janky on the inside because I just kind of like stitched all around it and like closed up the hole. I also did that for the armpits. So I did knit this on a 4.5 millimeter needle, which I think is just a little bit too big for the DK weight yarn that I was using. So it looks a little bit like holy and gapey. So it's more obvious when, I don't, it's a little hard to tell, but you can sort of see like my knuckles through it. I find if I stretch the fabric a little bit, you could just really see my skin through it. So it would have benefited from using a 4 millimeter needle as opposed to a 4.5 millimeter, which is what I originally did for my gauge swatch. And I really liked the thickness of that fabric. But because I was trying to like get closer to gauge, I went up to a 4.5. Which I think looks fine on the color work portion, but then on the stockinette, it just looks a little too like holy. It's a little hard to tell, but when I look through it in the light, it just feels like there's a lot of holes. There's pros and cons to that, obviously. So it won't keep me as warm. I won't overheat as much. So that is a plus. It's a little bit of a lighter feeling garment, but at the same time, the yoke part is, it feels so thick that like I will still feel really hot. But nothing I could do about that now because the garment is done and I'm not reknitting this, because what I discovered is I actually really did not enjoy working with this yarn. I think this superwash patons clansman wool is just not my cup of tea. It was really hard to maintain the tension. It did block out for the most part, so it doesn't look like too wonky or like lopsided or just like uneven, but while I was knitting it, I felt like it was really hard to maintain my tension. And also there were so many parts of the yarn where it was like super thick in one part and then super thin on another part. So the parts where it was really thin, it made it look even gapier and more see-through. So that was very unpleasant. I would prefer to never use this yarn again, and I would not have that problem because this yarn is actually discontinued. So I guess that's okay. It's good that I finally got to use this. It was in my mom's stash for, I would say, like 10 plus years, but let's be real, it was probably 30 years because it was before she immigrated over to Canada. She brought it from like when she was in Hong Kong. And yeah, it's really nice to be able to use up this yarn. I did pair it up for the contrast color with the yarn that I'm using for my blue wave cardigan. So that one is I think it's called the souffle yarn that I bought in Korea from Som Knit. And yeah, I think it looks quite nice. It is like a more cool tone, kind of like grayish color, but against the red, it looks like it's white. I don't know if you guys agree with me, but I think it looks fine. And it bloomed quite nicely. When I was knitting it, it looked very thin, but I know after swatching this yarn, it does like kind of puff up and fill in all the holes. So that's what it did. And when I look at the stitch definition, I do find that it looks very similar in thickness and puffiness and fluffiness to the red one. So yeah, it was a good pairing. No other things to say about this other than that I'm glad this is done. I don't love doing stranded color work. That is one thing I learned from this pattern. And I do not like this yarn. So that's another thing. And not only was it just very unpleasant to knit with this yarn, I think like just wearing this is so much itchier than the typical wool yarns that I use. So this one is a superwash yarn. So I thought the fibers would be kind of laying more flat. It's more silky and just less irritating on the skin, but for some reason it's particularly irritating. I made the neckline a little bit shorter than what the pattern suggested because I didn't want it to go too high up on my neck, because I had a feeling that this yarn would just itch my skin like crazy. So even with a turtleneck underneath, I was hoping that the turtleneck would kind of raise up a little bit higher than the actual neckline so that no part of the wool will touch my skin. And yeah, I think I did kind of achieve that, or I might have to find just like another turtleneck that is like an undergarment layer to just be a little bit taller, or just roll it up a bit. But for the most part, this yarn is just so super itchy that I don't really understand why. So I think just certain yarns I'm a bit more sensitive to it. And I don't have any issues with the Patons Classic Wool Worsted. I don't have issues even with like something itchy like this, but also because I guess the neckline is a little lower, it doesn't feel as suffocating. It's not like right up like a crew neck or a turtleneck. So maybe that could be another reason. But yeah, this one just feels very itchy on my skin. And like the moment I put it on, I just want to take it off if it was in direct contact with my skin. So similar to mohair, but I think even mohair I might be a little bit more like tolerable to compared to this superwash Patons Clansman wool yarn. But yeah, those are my kind of thoughts on the yarn. The pattern itself was very well written. It was very simple. The floats were easy to do. The only thing is I don't think color work is for me, and that's totally okay. Everyone has different preferences on what they like to knit, but maybe in the future I might like it a little bit more. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Nothing else more to say about this one. This is the only finished garment that I have, and I'm very excited that I get to actually wear this for the holiday season. I likely will be wearing it to a lunch date that I have for the holiday season, which is going to be happening next week. I hope somebody will notice that I knitted this myself because that is the goal. But yeah, let's move on to works in progress. Okay, next up, let's talk about the Moby Sweater. So this is a work in progress that I'm currently working on right now, and it is the Moby Sweater by Petite Knit. This one is a cabled, very traditional type of sweater that is a drop shoulder with some texture parts of the pattern and folded over neckline, along with 1x1 ribbing for the cuffs, the body, and also the neck. So yeah, very simple. I would say it's very traditional. So it has the cables going down on either side of the shoulder. And then in the middle, there's like this kind of lattice looking pattern, which is super cool. And I really like this. I will talk more about that later, but that's the construction of the sweater. It is drop shoulder. Like I said, we start off with the back yoke, and then you do a short row shaping to kind of angle the shoulders downwards. You pick up stitches for each of the shoulder panels separately. You knit those down, connect in the front, you knit back and forth to finish off the front yoke, and then you connect in the round to do the rest of the body, pick up stitches for the armhole, knit each of the sleeves, and then you do the collar, you do some 1x1 ribbing, and then you fold it down. So that's the basics of the pattern. If that's something you would enjoy, I would suggest you check out this pattern, but it's very kind of just like straightforward and typical. You do a lot of reading of the charts, which I find aren't too difficult to read. And I would say in terms of sizing, the pattern motif between the two kind of cables and the middle part, that for the most part, there's only like 2 charts for that. And the only differences between all the sizes within each of the charts are really the double moss stitch, or do you call it seed stitch? I don't know. But it's the stitches on the side that really kind of get bigger or smaller based on the size. So the pattern motif itself doesn't really change. It's just the side parts that kind of give it more or less ease for each of the sizes. Okay, so I think for me, I am knitting the size extra small, which is the smallest size in the pattern that's available. It doesn't give me too much positive ease, but we'll see after blocking. And that is mainly because number one, I don't have all that much yarn. I only have 6 balls of the yarn that I'm using. And number two, like I know I just will get tired of doing this like crazy amount of texture and cables. So I wanted to kind of set myself up for success as opposed to failure. If I made a bigger size, I might just kind of get bored of the pattern and slowly kind of stop working on it, and then it just ends up being a work in progress forever. But I do want to wear this sometime in this coming winter, so have it ready and in my wardrobe by that time. And yeah, I think I'm on the right track. The yarn that I'm using is this Patons Classic Wool Worsted. This is the yarn ball. I have used pretty much half of this ball, and I think this is the second ball. So I am 1.5 balls in, and I've only gone through the back yoke and majority of the front yoke, so we'll see how that goes. This is in the color Natural Mix, and I bought this from Michael's, very cheap. I think with the 6 balls, it was something along like 30-ish Canadian dollars, so very affordable, totally reasonable for a full kind of sweater quantity. And it is a worsted weight yarn, so instead of what the pattern suggests using a 4mm needle, I think it suggests using like a DK weight plus a mohair. So that feels quite tight of a gauge for me, so I typically like to use 4.5mm needles with this yarn, which is what I'm doing, and this is how it's looking like so far. So this is how much I've gotten done. Last time I showed you, I think most of the back panel was done, or like, yeah, I believe most of the back panel was done. So this is how the back side is looking. I picked up the stitches for each of the shoulders along here. I think it looks really kind of like smooth in terms of the transition, and I really liked how the pattern suggested how to pick up the stitches, and it looks really, really nice. I think so far I didn't have too much trouble with the back panel. I think it just required a lot of focus for doing the short rows and reading the chart at the same time. But once the shoulder kind of short rows are done and you're just knitting like straight down here, it was pretty simple. Like I had the pattern memorized at that point, so it wasn't too finicky. I then picked up the stitches for each of the shoulders and knitted down, connected both sides along the front, casted on those stitches in the middle, and then I started knitting back and forth without any kind of increasing or short rows, so that was also straightforward. However, I did have one issue where I thought I knew the chart very well and had it memorized, but for the side kind of lattice here, when you do a turn for this like little diamond, I messed it up. I thought I was supposed to do a, you know, right leaning or left leaning cross, but instead I was supposed to just like knit it straight. And I only discovered that maybe like 4 or 5 rows later when my crosses were not lining up. And I was like, oh no, what is going on? So I thought I had the skill to ladder down for these lattice diamond sections, ladder down and fix that issue on either side of the diamond. So on both this side and this side. I did it. I thought everything was successful. I did another X number of rows. And then at some point I realized that I was short 2 stitches for this entire middle section. And after kind of going crazy for what felt like 2 hours, trying to figure out what went wrong, I discovered that when I laddered down to fix those 2 parts, I actually somehow dropped a stitch on both sides. So I dropped 1 stitch on one side, 1 stitch on the other. I think the middle part was supposed to be like 32 stitches. I ended up with only 30 stitches. So that's why I had another cross not lining up, and I was so upset because I didn't know how to fix it at that point, because obviously with a drop stitch, your tension would be completely off for all the rows in between, and it felt like I had like 10 rows. So I apologize if you hear so many sirens outside. It seems like there is clearly a large emergency. We will try to ignore and continue with the podcast. No, I was very upset because I had so many rows in between the part where I'm pretty sure I messed up and dropped those 2 stitches to the point where I was. So I had to literally frog back what felt like 2 full inches of work. And that was very upsetting because not only is picking up stitches really annoying when you have a bunch of texture and crossing over and cables, it's just, I did not know how to put in a lifeline. So I literally just ripped back and tried my very hardest to pick up every single stitch. And thank goodness I did not miss any this time. And I was able to get back to where I started. So yeah, that is very typical of me to have one giant error such that I have to frog back an entire section, or literally in this Eva cardigan, I frogged back an entire sleeve. So yeah, very common for me. I am hopeful that one day I will start a project where I don't have to frog back a huge portion. I thought I was on the right track because for the back yoke, I felt like it was so smooth. I didn't have to really like frog. I maybe might have tinked back like a few stitches, but I was pretty aware of when I made a mistake. This one, I guess I was just like thinking I was really professional or like just on a roll or something and just did not check my rows or count or do any of that. I don't usually put stitch markers on like this type of pattern. I thought it was really easy to just memorize. But yeah, now I'm just a bit more careful. I do check every like couple rows and just make sure I'm like on the right track. The crosses are crossing where they need to be. My only takeaway from that learning experience, which literally just happened yesterday. But yeah, that is my work in progress. Hopefully by the time I get to the next podcast, I'm like somewhere connected in the round and maybe near the end of the body. But I might, give myself a break and start working on a sleeve or something like that at some point. But for the most part, I think I generally like to do most of the body, if not all the body, before I start working on the sleeves because I like doing one sleeve after the other and just making sure my tension is very consistent between the two sleeves as opposed to doing like a sleeve, a body, back to the sleeve, and then to the other sleeve, that sort of thing. These sirens are literally nonstop. I do apologize, but literally it's a weekend morning and this is supposed to be the time where it's the least noisy because typically on weekdays there's construction directly across from this building and it's incredibly loud with like banging like from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., which is all the daylight hours. So there's nothing I can do about that. Please try to be patient with me. But in terms of plans and acquisitions, I don't really have all that much to say because I didn't purchase any new yarn, nor do I have any plans to cast on anything new at the moment because I do want to focus on my Moby sweater. And then when my hands cramp up and I can no longer work on the Moby sweater, I will switch over to my Just sweater, which is just a stockinette drop shoulder construction type of sweater. And that one is a lot easier to knit. I do have most of the body done. I just have to do the two sleeves and the bottom ribbing. So that one is a little bit more mindless, especially if, I need to kind of not focus on my knitting while I'm doing other tasks like watching TV or something like that. This one, because I have it memorized, it's still for the most part like easy, but I do have to like look at my knitting a lot more frequently. And if I have to read subtitles when I'm watching a K-drama, then it's a little hard to do both of those at the same time. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say for this knitting podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed and found today's video somewhat beneficial to you. And if you did, make sure you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on my future videos. I do tend to post every 2 weeks or so, particularly in the form of a knitting podcast because I just love sitting down and talking about what I've knitted and what I finished knitting and what I'm currently knitting. So yeah, those are my types of videos. If you guys have any ideas on what you would like to see as my next video or what I should cast on next, I would love to know. You can comment those suggestions down below. I read all my comments and I love kind of interacting with you guys because it's just a great, loving community in this knitting world. So yeah, thank you so much for watching and I'll see you guys in my next knitting podcast. Bye for now.